I looked at all the proof texts that people would give for Trinitarianism, and
Here we go.
I could see what they were saying, but it just could not undo the blatantly clear verses that made it clear that the one true God is the Father.
But notice he's now said, look, I'm thinking about the best passages, etc. So let's continue.
Father. Right. Now, is Jesus God? There's a way to answer that yes, that I do agree with. But when people say Jesus is God, they don't say it the way I say it. They don't mean what I mean. Without realizing it, from my point of view, they are turning Jesus into the Father.
That's not true. That's only true if you believe like he believes. So what he's basically doing is he has his newfound belief, right? That the Father is the only one that's truly God. So now he's saying, look, if I say, or if anybody says that Jesus is God, you're making him the Father. Why is that? Because under his belief, the only one that's God is the Father. But that's begging the question. He's assuming his belief as he's analyzing what he's talking about. And you can't do that. You can't assume the belief, not if you want to get to truth anyway, genuinely. You have to put everything on the table and say, okay, cool. Where is this? Where am I being guided? You can't take the position and then now start analyzing it from that position without going to the other side and saying, okay, how does this make sense? That's how you're going to just stay in the belief that you have.
To assert that he is absolutely equal to the Father is to ignore the fact that he clearly says the Father is greater than he.
All right. Point number one. To say that Christ is equal with the Father is to ignore that Christ said that the Father is greater than him. He's talking about John chapter 14. Now, I mentioned this earlier on, right? And I want you to just constantly be mindful of this, because I'm constantly mindful myself, right? This is why I prayed at the start and why I always, especially nowadays, want to do things in a humble way, right? There's so much just straight negativity in Christendom online where it's just attack, just like violent attacking, etc., which doesn't need to be done, right? We can reason logically, lovingly, truthfully, etc., and get to the truth, right? Notice, and this is the key thing, right? We don't want to be in the flesh, right? We want to be in the spirit. Because when we're in the spirit, we're walking by God's power. And that's how we're going to be most effective. When we're walking in the flesh, we can still be effective in God's kingdom, but we're not going to be as effective as if we were walking in the spirit. Just be mindful of that. But he said, Christ can't be equal with God. We can't take him as equal with God because Jesus says he's greater. Now, I need you to think back to what I said earlier on. One of the things I said was, you're going to come to a position when it comes to studying doctrine. And there's going to be one argument on one side, and there's going to be the other argument on the other side. And you have to decide, when you listen to both sides, what makes most sense. All right. So Young Don is saying here, Jesus said the Father is greater than him. We're going to look at that passage in a moment. And we as Trinitarians are saying, we understand this passage. We're not running away from this passage, but there's a logical, biblical answer which can be true and doesn't destroy or go against the doctrine of the Trinity. And when we think about this argument here, when I present something to you about this verse he's talking about, you now on the other side have to say, okay, cool. Jesus did say he's greater. The Father is greater than him. But does that destroy the Trinity? Or but what about what Israel just said? Does that negate the other position? At least in some ways. All right, let's look at this here, right? First passage. So what Young Don is talking about here is from John chapter 14, verse 28. Now, notice what he said, right? This is Jesus here saying, he says, you have heard how I said unto you, I go away and come unto you. If ye loved me, you would rejoice, because I said, I go unto the Father, for my Father is greater than I. Okay, cool. We can read this and just be, okay, cool. Jesus is saying quite clearly, the Father is greater than him. Okay. First thing I'm going to say to you, and this is just basic, right? Many words have more than one meaning, right? When we look at this word greater, greater can mean greater, as in the way Young Don's talking about this. It can be greater as in he's better, more powerful, etc. Greater can be more of. right? There's more of this same thing. This is going to be significant. There's multiple different ways anyway, right? Larger, etc. If we take the interpretation that Young Don is saying here, notice what that is going to force us to believe earlier on in this passage. Let's go back, right? And I'll show you what I'm talking about. Verse 12. Notice what it says here, right? It says, verily, verily, I say unto you, Jesus speaking again, he that believes on me, the works that I do, shall he do also. And greater, same word, than these shall he do, because I go unto my Father. So at this particular point in time, we need to think about what Young Don just said and what many people who say Jesus said the Father's greater than him means, and apply it now to this verse. Jesus is saying, if you believe in me, the works that I'm doing, the miracles I'm doing, etc., you are going to do greater works than them, because I'm going to my Father. So we have to now ask ourselves a question. If Jesus in John 14:28 is saying that the Father is greater than him in essence or in substance or however he believes this, are we now saying that the disciples, and Jesus was saying that the disciples are going to do greater, better miracles than Jesus did? I don't know about you, but to me, that's clearly absurd. Think about the miracles that Jesus did. All of the miracles he did. And you think that Jesus was saying that the disciples or anyone after the disciples was going to be doing better, greater miracles, greater works than Jesus? No. When we think about this, we know that's not what Jesus is saying. Why? Because we know words have different meanings. Words can have different meanings. So you can't have it both ways. Young Don can't have it both ways. I can't have it both ways. If we're going to apply verse 28 that way, why are we not going to apply verse 12 that way? And these are the kind of questions we have to think about. This is why I said, when we have struggles, we need to go to people who we can trust, who have been in the game longer than us, and reason with them and pour out our concerns to them and see what they say back. And I would love to know if Young Don or other people would turn around and say, yeah, like the disciples did greater miracles than walking on water, than feeding the 5,000, than healing the blind, etc. All of this different stuff. Like, I'd love to hear Young Don say, yeah. And other people, like, seriously, okay, cool. This is my position I'm taking. And because I'm taking this position, I'm going to have to either fall on my sword, right? And own it, which is the proud thing to do, or to just be humble and say, you know, okay, cool. I've got more to think about. Yes, Jesus said the Father's greater than him, but why is that? Well, as a Trinitarian, why do we believe this? We believe because he was in an incarnate state. And this is the whole point when you read from John 13 to John 17. It's the whole point. He starts with a visual illustration. It talks about how Jesus, when he knew he was going to God, his time was coming, it says he disrobed, which is what John 1 says at the beginning of the gospel. He created the world, but he was in the world and the world knew him not. He disrobed, John 13 says. And he washes the disciples' feet. He served his people, the disciples, which is a symbolization of what? What he was literally doing there. He came to serve, not to be served. And then what did he do after he'd finished washing their feet? He robed himself again. He was God in heaven. He lowered himself, washed the disciples' feet, and put the robe back on, right? Went back to heaven where he was previously. That's the visual illustration you see in what he's doing from John 13 to 17. It can be great logic, but to me, just honestly, like, I just think this is just basic logic.